My name is Carlos Morales. I will be giving the Wars in the Middle East speech. War, something that has been around since the existence of man. Countless wars, countless battles within those wars, victories, losses, depending on what side of the fence you were on. Allow us to turn back the hands of time, taking us back 19 years back to the year of 2001. Many of us, including myself, were only babies, with no recollection of where we were at or of what we were doing with our families when this tragedy happened. We are, of course, talking about the unfortunate event of 9/11, the day that would ultimately resort to the United States waging war on terrorism, a war that we still fight to this day. This means that American troops have been sacrificing, fighting, and dying overseas on foreign soil to carry out the mission of the United States basically ever since I was born. Everybody who was old enough at that time to understand what was happening remembers exactly where they were at and exactly what they were doing when they first found out about this act of terrorism. For many, it was a calling to be the first to defend our Constitution, which led them to joining the armed forces in order to protect our country and its people. I bring you all here today to speak about the darkest things of what one human being can do to another human being and where that takes place. This takes place in war. We, of course, are not talking about any war, however. We are talking about the ongoing war that is currently plaguing the Middle East with terror and violence. The, the same war that a lot of us have some sort of family who is either fought or who is either fighting currently to protect us and keep us safe. Nowadays, Americans are still very separated on terms of political views and moral values. Instead of just agreeing to disagree, most Americans in the United States today are either far left or they're far right. Very few are smart enough to do what we did when this tragedy happened, and that is meeting in the middle. I was not old enough to see it for myself, but the ones who were there speak of how great and how truly inspiring it was to see all Americans come forth as one. And that at that time, it did not matter who you were voting for, it did not matter if your moral values aligned, it did not matter if your political views were the same. None of this mattered. What mattered at that time was coming together and coming to the conclusion of, we love this country, what are we as Americans going to do about this? Which is in fact what weighed in the heavy decision of protecting this nation that we built from the ground up by leaving our homes and going overseas straight into the heart of where terrorism lies, which is the Middle East. The beginning of the war was horrific to say the least. War itself is a truly horrifying aspect of human. But this was a war like one we have never seen before. Going into a completely new environment in which we are not familiar with at all is always one of our greatest challenges. In World War II, our troops had to deal with urbanized warfare, where they pushed and fought through cities that were urbanized throughout France and Germany in order to stop the Axis. In Vietnam, our troops had to fight a new fight, a new war in a different style called jungle warfare. They had to adapt to the intense, scorching heat and humidity, which is heavy within itself, but they were more worried about Vietnamese snipers hiding in the trees and foxholes under their feet in those jungles that they were patrolling, which contained kamikaze troops. They had to adapt to all of this, but moving on to our current war, and we come across a new type of war. Not just the fact that it's sandy and it's in the desert, but the fact that we're facing a new enemy, and this new enemy brings along new weapons of mass destruction. It is difficult to say which war is worse, or who had it bad, who had it more bad than the others. But personally, what I would be most paranoid about, more than anything else, if I'm being honest, is the IEDs, or also known as improvised explosive devices, which are made by hand by the terrorists. I could go on and on about the disgustingly creative ways that these terrorists use these bombs not only against us, but against their own people. I will only give a few examples in order to paint a real picture of the differences in all of these wars. Most know about the countless IEDs which are planted in the main roads of the Middle East, targeting the heavy infantry assault vehicles which carry American troops. Another way is they will strap an IED onto a human being who is either willing to die or is usually going to be mentally handicapped and taken advantage of. Then they will push him into a crowd of civilians or American troops, and, well, you know what happens after that. On the bright side of things, after years and years, after countless sacrifices, and after many casualties, the US, with the help of other allied countries, are now getting to the point where we are pulling more and more troops out. We're occupying less and less bases. This was up until, of course, what I like to call the Great Scare, which is where Trump called in a drone strike, which killed an Iranian general, which could have potentially started World War III. Thankfully, the Iranian chief said himself that he does not wish death to America and he does not wish death to Americans. He only wishes death to Trump and those who were personally responsible and the higher ranking military personnel for that drone strike, which in other words means we avoided a whole war. War is the most raw and unfiltered version of what one man can do to another man, for that greater cause that is valued to that individual. This war has lasted throughout the presidency of 3 different presidents, but war is something that has also happened since the beginning of civilization. Unfortunately, it will continue to happen after we are long gone and dead, and it could even happen again within our lifetimes. It already has once.